Nottingham, a city with a proud tradition of thieving little scamps being elevated to massive popularity, and thus a fitting place for Games Workshop to call their home. It's also the city I grew up in, so, I'm allowed to talk shit about it. However, in today's video, we won't be booing and hissing at Wargaming's Prince of Thieves, but instead shining a light on some of the interesting places where they've dipped their sticky little fingers in an effort to build the universe of Warhammer 40,000. But before we jump in and take a look at that, I had to rent a very expensive hotspot in order to put this video up because I'm currently still trying to move house and have no internet at home. So if you'd like to show your appreciation, then please do remember to smack that like button. Also consider maybe subscribing to the channel or looking at those links below for other ways to support me. Much appreciated, friends. So with all that said, let's jump into looking at 40k's influences, some of them a little bit more obscure, maybe some of them just a little bit more interesting. With its overcrowded megacities, authoritarian overtones, and general grim darkness, you probably already had an idea that Games Workshop were at least fans of Judge Dredd when making Warhammer 40k. However, something that really surprised me personally when recently getting back into the lore of Judge Dredd was how much of the language 40k has borrowed from it. And that was something I never realised previously. Ubiquitous 40k words that we really do think of as 40k words, such as Juve, Hab, and even Stubgun caught my attention. But also 40k's favourite Minecraft block, Plasteel, appears to have shown up in Judge Dredd before it ever did in 40k. But more so even than that, which I think is just kind of interesting, there's also a really obvious one that's often overlooked, the Adeptus Arbites. Arbites being basically the word arbiter, which literally means judge, and eagle motifs everywhere, and I mean, if that doesn't convince you, just look at the original miniatures for the Adeptus Arbites. It's definitely Judge Dredd. Okay, once more, I don't think the inclusion of this one itself is gonna be the surprise. I think everyone watching this is probably at least peripherally aware of Aliens and Predator as two giant sci-fi creature feature horror series the GW have definitely watched in a darkened meeting room whilst fondling notepads. However, some of the younger, or maybe just less aware viewers amongst you might not know that the biomechanica style often associated with Tyranids and Genestealers is actually the brainchild of genius Swiss artist H.R. Giger. Giger is credited in basically every film in the Alien franchise where the alien creature or one of the ancient ships that they often show up in is featured. And actually, in a moment of cool foreshadowing whilst researching for this, turns out that H.R. Giger was also credited for art on the original attempt to make a movie of Dune by Frank Herbert, which never actually came to be. That aside, you could of course be forgiven for thinking that the Alien Predator franchise borrowing is a relic of Games Workshop's past, where they were much looser with how they would look at other IPs and how closely they might consider copying them. But you'd be wrong. Let's not forget a certain little Catachan colonel who looks more than a little bit like Carl Weathers, who played Dylan in the first Predator movie. And at me saying that, you might well stand up and shout at your screen and say, well, that's just a coincidence. But is it? I mean, are you forgetting those little drops of neon blood on the leaf? That someone in the heavy metal team chose to paint that way, and someone higher up than them chose to put it out that way. I don't think it's just a coincidence. And to be fair, there's precedent for this, right? Imperial Guard is one of Games Workshop's favourite places to hide these maybe slightly too cheeky little inspirations. Let's take a look at Sly Marbo, whose name is literally Sylvester Stallone's nickname and a rearrangement of the letters of Rambo, one of his most popular characters. Let's look at Gaunt's Ghosts, which is my favourite series in all of Warhammer fiction, and I will sing its praises till the day I die. But it is more than a little bit similar to Sharp, the series with Sean Bean that aired in the late 90s, early 2000s, that deals with the Napoleonic Wars and such like. So yeah, still to this day, just having a little dip in the Aliens and Predator cookie jar. Interesting. Okay, this third one isn't going to be a lengthy one or a deep one particularly because, well, it's mostly just an interesting one, and it has come up a few times recently in discourse about Games Workshop in general, so we won't give it too much time. But born in Kent, England in 1867, Lionel Johnson is what you would consider to be a fairly underperforming artist, only ever really becoming known with any notoriety for one poem that he wrote. However, in the somewhat grim darkness of 1867, Lionel Johnson really stood out as a personality. Why? Because he was both a devout Catholic and a gay man. Two things that it's very, very difficult to be today, but it was a nightmare to be back then. His struggles to reconcile his sexuality with his religious morality led to him writing that one poem that he would later become famous for. What was that poem called? The Dark Angel. The content of the poem itself mostly deals with a dark secret, a need for atonement, you know, the kind of themes that are really central to Dark Angels in Warhammer 40k. But moreover even than that, let's just actually take a second to point out the obvious. The guy's name is Lionel Johnson. The Dark Angels Primarch is called Lionel Johnson. They didn't even change the name. They literally used a real life guy's name. That's crazy. But then I suppose it's also kind of fair enough because back then in GW's collective minds, would they have really expected wargaming nerds to be reading late 19th century LGBTQ+ literature? It's probably a safe bet that they didn't. Frank Herbert's 1965 novel Dune is often cited as an inspiration for Warhammer 40,000, but I actually think that maybe the term inspiration is being a little bit generous, and that it probably sways a bit more into the realms of a bit of the cheeky five-finger discount. But let's discuss that. Dune deals with a spacefaring humanity that is basically held together by a MacGuffin, in this case the Spice Melange, which you can think of functionally as working very similarly to the Astronomicon in 40k. It's the central plot device through which humanity can't do the things that humanity does without it. Dune also has an emperor of all humanity, much like 40k, and he's even referred to later in the story as the God Emperor. And much like the Golden Boy on the throne, he is a power figure who has a tendency to make brutal decisions for the sake of humanity. He has an elite personal army that outclasses all other military forces of the humans, and he also associates quite closely with this kind of pseudo-religious psychic group of women called the Bene Gesserit, who bear more than a striking resemblance in places to some of the ideas behind Sisters of Silence and Sisters of Battle. Are you starting to see how this could maybe be just a little bit more than an inspiration? In the history of Dune, there was even an AI robot uprising kind of scenario that took place where the Emperor of Mankind had to go on a mass smackdown laying spree dealing with all these robots, and as a result banned AIs, and that is basically exactly the same as the history of 40k. Which is why servitors now exist in 40k, because that's kind of the workaround. Speaking of servitors in Dune, there are also human-computer-like things. That's another thing that the two have in common. The truth is, Dune is actually probably an example of GW borrowing way more than they should have, and somehow getting away with it. And with a new movie that's just landed this year for Dune, I think now's a great time to actually be talking about this, because it's an opportunity to bring people to that franchise. And with the new movie, the old movie, plus the book, the audiobooks, there's a lot of ways to consume Dune now, regardless of your preference. And that kind of brings me nicely in a beautiful segue to the point I wanted to end this video on. Most ideas these days aren't original. Most things borrow from something else. And I don't think that pointing out where GW maybe overstepped the line in its borrowing from other things is a reason to fuel the fire to go and get mad at 40k and hate on GW. Instead, I hope that what you will take away from this video is an inspiration to go and look at these other things, these things that inspired 40k, check them out for yourself and realize how cool they are and maybe get into them. Maybe this is an opportunity to get a new generation of younger wargamers into things like 2000 AD and Dune, which are really, you know, if you're my age, very cool things that you grew up with. I also think in a world where GW like to blow their own trumpets so much for their world building, it is an important part of critical discourse to remind people that they might not actually be as good at it as they claim they are. Just, you know, let people make their own minds up on stuff like that instead of buying into whatever the company PR rep says. So I hope you found this video interesting, maybe even insightful, and I hope that as a result of watching it, you will go forth and check out some of these really cool properties. Some of these are things that I really love and are very close to my heart, and they might just end up being close to your heart too. So thanks for watching, folks, and I'll see you in the next one.